Hello, you're watching the Daily Roundup by People's Dispatch, where we bring you some of the top stories from around the world. Let's take a look at the headlines. Global calls to lift sanctions on quake-hit Syria grow. Delegation flags human rights concerns in Peru. Concerns over Ohio train mishap rise as government downplays harm. Mexico and Cuba vow to enhance bilateral ties, denounce US sanctions. Syria's permanent representative at the United Nations, Bassam Sabag, told the Security Council on Monday, February 13, that all countries should provide humanitarian assistance to all those who are affected by the earthquake and avoid all kinds of politicization. He reiterated his country's position that Western-imposed illegal coercive measures have caused delays in his country's earthquake relief support. Bassam was speaking during the special meeting called by the UN Security Council to discuss the impact of the February 6 earthquake on Syria. Though Turkey has received aid and relief from multiple Western countries, including the United States, no Western country except Italy have come forward to provide help to Syria so far. On the contrary, various developing countries such as Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, Algeria and others have extended their supporting hand to Syria and sent relief material and volunteers, including doctors, to earthquake-affected areas in the country. China also has sent relief material worth $4.4 billion to Syria so far. More than 31,000 people have been killed in Turkey and over 5,800 in Syria in the earthquake on February 6. According to the United Nations, the earthquake, which was centered in southern Turkey, has affected more than 50,000 square kilometers of area covering at least 10 provinces in Turkey and Syria. The United Nations also claimed that at least 6,000 high-rise buildings have been damaged in the earthquake and hundreds of aftershocks, and the total death figures will go up in the coming days. According to some initial estimates, the earthquake has caused a damage of around $85 billion or around 10% of Turkey's total GDP. The economic damages in Syria are still unclear. Bassam pointed out that the impact of the sanctions is as devastating for Syrians as the earthquake, according to Sana. He highlighted that the health sector in the country has been weakened and depleted due to sanctions and war. It faces great shortages of medical equipment and medicine, which is why it is unable to provide adequate relief during emergencies such as the pandemic and this earthquake. Syria alone did not have the capacity to face this unprecedented catastrophe due to the repercussions of the terrorist war waged against it for 12 years and the suffocating blockade imposed on its people as a result of Western unilateral coercive measures, Bassam emphasized. Meanwhile, more than a dozen left groups and human rights organizations in West Asia and North Africa issued a joint statement last week demanding immediate lifting of the unjust siege on Syria, restoring diplomatic relations with it, and dropping the imperialist Caesar Act. The signatories, who include Tunisian Workers' Party, Workers' Democratic Way Party of Morocco, the Lebanese Communist Party, among others, condemned the policy of double standards practiced by imperialism and official international institutions, including when dealing with disasters and pandemics, which confirms their aggressive and brutal nature that contradicts all human values and principles. A delegation of 17 human rights defenders and members of parliament from Argentina on Monday, February 13, concluded their international mission of solidarity and human rights in Peru. The delegation had started its visit to the country on February 7 to assess the human rights situation and document the widespread abuses and violations taking place against the protesters at the hands of the Peruvian security forces. As part of their mission, the delegation met with many victims, leaders, and representatives from civil society groups, trade unions, press organizations, among others. They heard and documented complaints from the victims they met, detailing the wide variety of abuses and rights violations, including torture, physical abuse, illegal and arbitrary detention, sexual violence and rape in custody, gun violence, and extrajudicial killings and murder. They noted that it is pertinent to take victim testimonies as the state authorities and institutions would actively try to cover up their own abuses and crimes. As per reports, the delegation received a total of 144 complaints from the victims they spoke to as part of their mission. They reportedly visited the Peruvian capital, Lima, along with other cities and regions such as Cusco, Juliaca, Ayacucho, and Ica. Several of these areas that the delegation visited are still witnessing military and police operations against the demonstrations as they try to repress and crack down on the protesters. The delegation's findings stated that Juliaca can be considered the epicenter of state violence and repression against protesters, with 20 murders occurring in this region alone. Several members of the delegation have concluded that it is a case of less humanity and that the state can currently not guarantee the safeguarding of basic human and civil rights of Peruvians. The delegation called on the government to ensure justice for each and every person whose rights have been violated during the repression against the anti-government demonstrations taking place across the country since December last year. That is when former President Pedro Castillo was unceremoniously removed from the presidency by the right-wing dominated parliament. Moving on to our next story, concerns continue to grow among the residents of the town of East Palestine in the United States over the health and environmental consequences arising out of the train accident and ensuing explosion that occurred earlier this month. A Norfolk Southern freight train had on February 3 derailed in the town of East Palestine, Ohio. 50 out of 100 train cars ran off the tracks, lighting a massive fire that could be seen from miles away. Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio issued an evacuation order on February 5 due to the possibility of a major explosion. Local community members, along with activists from across the country, have sounded the alarm regarding the impact the incident could have on public health and the environment. Many have pointed to reports of animals dying en masse as evidence. Yet, despite the public outcry over the environmental and public health catastrophe, the actions of Ohio authorities reflect an attitude of concealment. A reporter with the news outlet News Nation was recently violently arrested while covering one of Governor DeWine's news conferences regarding the derailment. Police officers claimed that the reporter, Evan Lambert, was being too loud while the governor was speaking and in response tackled him to the ground and handcuffed him. Lambert was released from jail the same day. Ohio officials claim that they have received no reports of animals dying in or near East Palestine, despite multiple public reports of local animal deaths. News Nation obtained a video of dead fish in the Ohio River near East Palestine. According to wildlife supervisor Scott Angelo, these fish could have died due to toxic fumes dissolving oxygen in the water, although the causes have not been confirmed. Farmer Taylor Holzer claims that his foxes have fallen mortally ill after the derailment. Many concerns of East Palestine residents as well as those of the rest of the nation stem from the fact that the derailed train had 20 cars carrying hazardous material. Norfolk Southern Railroad conducted a controlled release on February 6 of several tankers that ran the risk of explosion. State officials are yet to inform residents of East Palestine about what effect this controlled release of toxic fumes combined with a massive fire burning for 5 days will have. 5 of the derailed cars contained vinyl chloride, a carcinogen linked to various forms of cancer. The Environmental Protection Agency is monitoring 2 other toxic chemicals, phosgene and hydrogen chloride. Public health experts have indicated that the effects of these chemicals could last for decades. Meanwhile, reports have noted that the EPA has scheduled an emergency council meeting in the town on Wednesday to listen to and address the concerns of the residents. And finally, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel on Saturday, February 11, arrived in Campeche, Mexico and was received by his Mexican counterpart Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Under the leadership of Diaz-Canel and López Obrador, friendship and cooperation between Cuba and Mexico have deepened and reached unprecedented levels in recent years. This was Diaz-Canel's 3rd official visit to Mexico, including his attendance at the inauguration of President AMLO. The main objective of Saturday's visit was to continue strengthening bilateral relations. President AMLO recalled that Mexico and Cuba have always had relations of political brotherhood, and he called Diaz-Canel a distinguished and admired guest. He added that for more than 60 years, Cuba has defined with the will and support of an indomitable people that the frontiers should always exist between sovereignty and the desire for hegemonic domination. At the same time, he demanded that the United States government lifts the economic, commercial, and financial blockade that has been imposed on Cuba for more than 6 decades. As a sign of goodwill and that all the countries of the Americas are willing to join forces, I consider and express with respect that the United States government should lift as soon as possible the unjust and inhumane blockade of the Cuban people, he said. In the light of the same, President AMLO expressed his willingness to lead an international campaign demanding lifting of the embargo. On his part, President Diaz-Canel thanked AMLO for his solidarity with the Cuban people. He added that they have faced tremendously difficult challenges in the last few years and months due to a combination of the impact of nature and the effects of the intensified blockade. The Mexican president additionally thanked his Cuban counterpart for sending doctors to Mexico, some of whom serve in dangerous or remote areas. Over 600 Cuban doctors and specialists are working in 12 Mexican states. López Obrador announced that during 2023, more Cuban professionals could join this health program. Meanwhile, the Cuban president explained that in May 2022, during President AMLO's visit to Cuba, both countries agreed that they could send specialists to provide public health services in health units or institutions of their respective nations. He further noted that in less than a year, they are complying with what was agreed on and that there are already results to show. Diaz-Canel added that the two countries will analyze new goals in areas of common interest. In this regard, he indicated that the export of crushed stone ballast from Cuba to Mexico for the Mayan train project, a tourist train that will run around the Yucatan Peninsula, could be identified as a new area of their bilateral relationship. These are beneficial projects for our peoples and are examples of the potential that exists for the development of bilateral ties. And that's all we have for today's episode. For more such stories, visit our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.